Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. There's an image in the Visuddhimagga for the wheel of becoming, which is a type or an allegory for samsara, the wheel of becoming, the wheel of birth and death. The hub of the wheel is ignorance. The spokes are the formations of merit and demerit. That is sankharas, that is karmic actions. And the rim is birth, sickness, old age, and death, or the basic factors of existence. The hub being ignorance is also expressed in the formula for the dependent origination, which usually begins with ignorance because of ignorance formations. Ignorance is one of the three root defilements. Dosa, lobha, moha. Moha being another name for ignorance. So that is ignorance or confusion, desire, and ill will. These two, desire or craving and ill will or aversion, in some ways they're just aspects of the same thing. It's either desire for pleasant objects or the aversion to unpleasant objects, which is just a negative form of desire. In both cases, there's a discontent, a willing with the way things are, the way things that are presented, the reality that's presented to consciousness at this moment. There's something wrong with it. I either want something different or better, or I want to get rid of something that's painful, unpleasant. And both of these ultimately have their root in ignorance. This is the quintessential root defilement. This is also seen in the progression of the stages of awakening. The last defilement to go is ignorance. Of the 10 fetters, the 5 higher ones that are still suffered by an anagami, someone who's 3 stages of 4, three stages of awakening, so someone who's almost fully there, still has a desire for becoming in the fine material or immaterial planes, still has the I am conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. So ignorance only is fully overcome by the Arahant. The Pali for ignorance is avijja, which is not knowledge or not knowing. So this is very close, parallel to the English word ignorance, which comes from the Greek, ignosis, gnosis being knowledge, so not knowledge in both cases. So it's a kind of a darkness of mind, an incomplete understanding. It's the opposite of wisdom. Panya, wisdom or understanding, is the opposite of ignorance. So it's a lack of wisdom or knowledge. In the traditional iconography of the dependent origination, as particularly in Tibetan tradition, where they depict it with images in a wheel, ignorance is shown as a blind man stumbling along with a stick. So the obvious question that arises is, what are we ignorant of? And the answer given in the Dhammasangini is that we are ignorant of 8 things, the Four Noble Truths. So we're ignorant of suffering, the cause of suffering, the ending of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. And we're ignorant of the past, the future, the past and the future together, and we're ignorant of conditionality and conditioned states. So let's go through this list. These are the specific kinds of ignorance that are meant when we talk about ignorance as a root defilement. Ignorance of the First Noble Truth of dukkha is not understanding, not seeing the characteristic of dukkha, the unsatisfying, imperfect nature of things, not understanding, not having the wisdom to see through the glamour, the illusion of the objects in samsara. In our existence in the conditioned world, our consciousness is constantly presented with a stream of variegated objects. And being ignorant of their true nature, as being void of real substance, being impermanent, of being imperfect, we're caught in this show, this constant stream of amazing, terrifying, wonderful, terrible objects that stream before the mind. And it throws the mind around and around. And craving arises here. Craving and aversion arises here because we're craving for the objects and we're feeling aversion to the objects when they're unpleasant. So being ignorant of their true nature is the first thing. Being ignorant of the second noble truth, being ignorant of the cause of suffering, which is craving. This process of desiring the next object is what keeps the whole thing turning. The mind jumping, chasing after the object. Is the mode of energy. The craving acts as the mode of energy for the whole of samsara, which, when it is reduced to its simplest, immediate expression, its mind craving an object, taking an object, becoming dissatisfied with the object, and craving the next object. And everything else in all the various realms of existence is just an elaboration of that simple theme. And this is, at the last analysis, this is all that we're doing in each moment of conditioned consciousness. We're just chasing after the objects, driven by craving. Yeah. Ignorance of the third noble truth. The third noble truth is the truth of the ending of suffering. So it's the truth of the unconditioned, the truth of nibbana. And until nibbana is experienced, then one remains ignorant of it. And this is something that is by its nature, that the unconditioned or nibbana is by its nature not susceptible to reason, not susceptible to description in words. So anything one might think about it or imagine about it is going to be wrong. And even if someone did have an understanding of it and tried to express it in words, it would fall short. So this is why the Buddha spoke of Nibbana very little, actually, in all his discourses. Because any attempt to confine it, describe it in words, is to falsify it. So we're inevitably ignorant of it. Until even the lower stages of awakening, one has only a partial understanding. The Arahant is the only one who has completely eliminated ignorance, so has a full understanding of Third Noble Truth. Fourth Noble Truth is the path leading to the end of suffering. And we have always some degree of ignorance of the path. Even if we try and follow the path, we're operating from some degree of ignorance, and we're striving to use the factors of the path to attenuate and reduce that ignorance and come closer to a full understanding. The path is the Eightfold Path, the 8 factors, the way of living, of acting, and of holding the mind, has these 2 aspects. There's the mundane path, or the lokaya, or ordinary path, and there's the supramundane or transcendental, the lokuttara path. And the ordinary path is the one that we should learn and make an effort to follow. That's all that's initially accessible, and it's the way that leads on to the transcendental path. But the path factors come together at some point in perfection, and they all incline towards Nibbana. And this is the moment before full awakening. The description of the process of awakening that's given in the texts, like the Visuddhimagga, break it down into a 2-stage process in the end. There's Magga and Phala. Magga is path and Phala is fruit. So Magga is the last volitional moment, and Phala is the fruition moment, or the last receiving of karmic result, the last resulting moment. And the path moment is the Eightfold Path coming together and making a quantum shift in orientation. And so all the path factors incline towards Nibbana. So right action is, action directed towards Nibbana, and at this point it's entirely mental action. Right livelihood is how we nourish ourselves, how we obtain nourishment in the world. And at this moment it becomes the nourishment of the mind, which is nourishing only on Nibbana. So all these path factors have this fulfillment in the moment of transcendental path. And this is something that, because it inclines towards the transcendental, one is ignorant of its full import. So even as we gain an understanding of the mundane path, there still remains until the end some ignorance of the transcendental path. Then ignorance of the past and future, and past and future together. This is meant to express that we are ignorant of where we come from and where we're going. And in the general picture, it's the expression of our past and future lives, of which we're quite ignorant generally. We're situated in this long sequence of existences, and we're quite ignorant of where we came from or where we're going. But even within this lifetime, we're shrouded in a great deal of ignorance. We've forgotten most of what we've said and done and thought, and it's all fading away into the mists, and we have no knowledge of where we're going. Now, in any moment of time, you might be more or less vividly aware of what's going on, but then how soon we lose that. It fades away into memory. Can you say with certainty what you had for lunch 10 days ago? This is, unless you have the same thing every day, I guess. But it's there are experiences that can be very vivid and real in the moment. They fade very quickly. Only traces remain. And in the normal run of things, nothing or next to nothing remains at all from previous existences, nor can we know what our future existences hold. And the last factor mentioned was the ignorance of conditionality and conditioned states. The idea that this is a word that gets used a lot in various ways: conditionality. This is Paticca Samuppada. This is one of the central philosophical tenets of Buddhism, is the importance of conditionality, that things arise in this world according to conditions, causes and conditions, and not otherwise. This is the expression of causality, that there is no randomness or arbitrariness. Things arise because of a set of conditions. And understood in a deep way, this is an aspect or a component or a reflection of the truth of emptiness, because nothing can possibly exist as a discrete standalone entity with a own essence. It only exists as a momentary combination of factors, of external factors. So that reality can't be pinned down in any definitive way. It's always in flux, and it's arising and falling because of conditions. And the conditions then become causes for a further set of unfolding conditions. And there's no point at which you can pin it down and say this is a solid thing, an entity on its own. It's only a flux of interdependent causes and conditions. And we tend to be more or less ignorant of that, even if we can approach some understanding of it on an intellectual or philosophical level. The mind has a tendency to see or determine the universe in terms of discrete entities. And we keep falling into that delusion again and again. And this is why we can't see the truth of emptiness. It's a shortcut, it's a kind of a mental shortcut for making sense of the complex reality, is to break it down into discrete units. I think we can see how it has a kind of this delusion, which is really a kind of a crude approximation of reality, has a functional use in allowing us to get some kind of functional handle on the world. But it's ultimately a delusion in the metaphysical sense. It's not an expression of reality. So, ignorance of causes and conditions. So this was given as a list of the 8 kinds of things we are not, that we're not knowing of, that we're ignorant of, and that causes us to wander in samsara. In the dependent origination, the ignorance that is the cause of sankhara, meaning karmic. In this context, it means karmic action. So because we're ignorant, we're not operating from full understanding. Anything we do with body, speech, and mind is going to be like a blind man stumbling through a room in the dark, tripping over things and knocking things down. We're fumbling out, we're acting out without full understanding, so our actions are disruptive of the universal harmony. Even our good actions, are still there. In this sense, we're not distinguishing so much between good and bad actions. Just actions as such are in some way a disturbance of the harmony of the universe. And I think this is one way of understanding how karma works, is to see it as a kind of a parallel to physical laws of conservation. You have conservation of angular momentum and conservation of energy and so on in physics, that if you disturb one part of a system, then another part will shift to compensate. So this could be said, the universe has a strong tendency to try to balance itself, to come back to the 0 point. So you shake things up over here, then things are going to shake in the opposite resonance over there and bring things back to a 0 point. So when we act, when we create a sankhara, meaning we're now the volitional, or the vector of a volitional cause, then this creates a subtle disharmony in the universe that then balances itself as a natural reflex. And we experience, for good or ill, we experience the result of that karma at a later time as the balancing factor. It's said that the actions of an arahant have no karma attached to them, because an arahant is not acting out of ignorance. Arahant still does things in the world, like Sariputta or Moggallana. They still travel about and meet people and talk, and whatever they do in the world, they have effect. And they still receive the result of old karma, but they're not making any new karma, because their actions coming from full knowledge, full wisdom, don't act as this disharmonious vector anymore. So this is why an arahant doesn't take rebirth anymore, because they've not set up any karmic root for rebirth. And then the next stage in independent origination is rebirth linking consciousness, Patisandhi Vijnana. That because of these actions we take in the world, then when the consciousness alights in an appropriate place, And the dependent origination can be read on different time scales. The general way of seeing it is in terms of multiple lifetimes, so that the consciousness alighting is Padisandhi consciousness, the first one arising in a new continuum. It's conditioned by the actions, the sankharas, that came out of ignorance. So where it alights in what condition, in what station, is determined by these past factors. Again, cause and condition. But it also works on a lesser time scale within individual moments of time. Our consciousness is lighting on different objects. We're coming into existence afresh with each moment. Consciousness flashing into some relationship with reality based on causes and conditions of previous karma made, how we've habituated the mind. Yeah. And then I'm not going to go through the whole dependent origination at this time, but then, this sets the stage for the rest of it. And consciousness, name and form, the organism and sense contact and feelings and all the rest of it, and the beginning point is ignorance. So none of this coming into being, this becoming, would occur without the initial condition of ignorance. It was said by the Buddha that no original point can be found, can be known or discerned in this round of becoming. So it would be a misunderstanding to take ignorance as the origin in a chronological or temporal sense. Ignorance itself is existence because of causes and conditions. It exists because of the interplay of the defilements. It's said that the cause of ignorance is the asavas, the cankers, or the root defilements, which are ignorance, craving, becoming, and views. And there's different lists. That's the most common one. But in general, it means the underlying roots of defilement, the most fundamental of which is ignorance. So it becomes in this way circular or self-feeding. This is also another expression of our ignorance of the past, because we cannot trace it back and find the first point of origin, the first moment. The Buddha himself, the way he expressed it was, an origin of this round of becoming cannot be discerned, cannot be known. But in the commentaries and in all later tradition, it was taken that samsaric existence is actually without beginning, which is kind of makes reasonable or logical sense in the whole system. If nothing arises without a cause or condition, there can be no first cause. However far back in time you go to moment T1, then there'll have to be a T minus 1. Or else T1 is without a cause and condition. So we don't think of ignorance as the origin in a temporal sense, like everything arose at some moment in the past out of ignorance, but that ignorance is the root cause in a non-temporal or an existential kind of sense. We trace everything, all our defilements, and in fact all our existence, all our becoming, back to ignorance. The fact of being, becoming, manifesting, existing is an expression of an incomplete understanding. That the totality is not grasped, so there's a fragmentary nature to reality as it actually is experienced. That manifestation or existence is a kind of a shattering of the universal or primal, primordial void nature. And ignorance, as we say, it cuts very deep. It's only overcome by the Arahant. Only the Arahant or a Buddha is fully beyond ignorance. So it's the very last thing to go. There's that very interesting, fascinating talk by Ajahn Mahabua. It's either the last or one of the last public talks that he gave. It's certainly the last big one that got a lot of publicity, well known. It's been published, translated and published in English as Arahata Magga, Arahata Pala. And you can find it easily enough on the internet. And it caused this real sensation in Thailand when it came out. Because Ajahn Mahabua, who's always was kind of a maverick character, he, in this talk, he actually broke a Vinaya rule and openly declared about his states of awakening, and he talked about his experience of arahantship. And there's a lot in there that's quite interesting, but the bit that stuck with me was that he talked about having experienced in his meditation, having experienced a brilliant white light, all-encompassing, all-consuming, kind of universal white light. And for a long time he stayed there, and he thought that was it. That was the unconditioned. That was the completion of the path. And then at some point he realized, no, this is an error. This brilliant light is the last expression of ignorance. It's the last kind of ignorance. It's the most purified kind of state that you can have and still be ignorant. And without getting beyond that brilliant white light is the realizing the unconditioned, to be fully transcend ignorance. But this shows how subtle the nature of ignorance actually is. And we talk mostly the metaphors and the images that surround ignorance, avidya or moha, are images of darkness and all-consuming darkness and gloom. It's impenetrable. But here it is in its last manifestation as a brilliant white light, all-encompassing. And this seems like samsaric becoming reduced to its most pristine, simplest form. And just as an ordinary worldly light, you put it through a prism, you break it up into like a rainbow of colors. So our ordinary experience is like the fracturing of this initial white light into all these variegated forms and experiences and objects. And all of it stems from this same root of not knowing. So it's our task, our effort should be towards reducing and alleviating this cloud of unknowing, this darkness of the mind, by trying to see things as they actually are. As I said, the opposite of ignorance is wisdom, and wisdom is seeing things in their own nature as they actually are. So this is the whole effort of the path. In samatha meditation, we try and pacify and purify and clarify the mind to have a peaceful base from which to work. And with vipassana, we try and parse reality in its own nature, to see what these objects actually are in their own nature, not as we theorize about them, not as we emote about them, getting beyond names and getting beyond feelings and judgments, discriminations. But what is this object at this moment? What is its nature? How does it arise? How does it pass away? And understanding through this process, understanding causes and conditions. And this lessens the attachment, the craving in the mind, because the craving is based on ignorance. When the objects are seen in their true nature, then they're seen nothing to be craved, and also nothing to be feared or aversive of. They're just as they are in their own nature. And this leads to a subduing or a quelling of this energy of craving that drives the wheel round and round. It eventually allows the mind to do, as it were, to use a broad metaphor, it allows the mind to do a sideways leap. It's no longer in that samsaric round. So I'll leave those reflections for you.
Anamayam Dhamma Kataya Sadhu Karam Daramase
Sadhu, sadhu.